I never imagined that the most humiliating moment of my life would happen in a room full of strangers wearing expensive suits and fake smiles. Looking back now, I realize that evening did not destroy my life. It saved it. At the time, though, I believed everything I had worked so hard to build was collapsing right in front of my eyes. My name is Emily. I was 36 years old when I finally understood that love without respect slowly turns into a prison. It took me 9 years of marriage to learn that lesson, and by then I had already sacrificed more than I ever thought possible. When I met my husband, Daniel, we were both ordinary people with ordinary dreams. Neither of us came from wealthy families. We rented a tiny apartment, counted every dollar before grocery shopping, and celebrated every small victory as if we had won the lottery. Those years were difficult, but I remember them with warmth because we were partners. At least that was what I believed. Daniel dreamed of climbing the corporate ladder. He wanted to become someone important, someone respected. I admired his ambition. I honestly believed that if one of us succeeded, both of us would succeed together. I already had a stable career in marketing. My salary was slightly higher than his, so when opportunities appeared, it was always my income that kept us afloat. I worked long hours, accepted freelance projects during weekends, and postponed vacations because we needed every extra dollar. We paid his tuition for additional business courses. We invested in certifications that made his resume stronger. We moved to a better city because his company offered him a promotion. None of those decisions felt like sacrifices back then. They felt like investments in our future. When our daughter Lily was born, everything changed. Childcare was incredibly expensive, and Daniel's career was finally taking off. After many discussions, we agreed that I would leave my job temporarily to stay home with Lily. It seemed like the logical decision. My husband promised it would only be for a couple of years. He reminded me that my experience would always help me return to work whenever I wanted. I believed him without hesitation. The first years passed quickly. Lily filled every day with laughter, endless questions, and tiny adventures that made ordinary moments feel magical. I never regretted staying with her. Watching her grow was a privilege I will always treasure. What I did not notice was how quietly my own identity disappeared. Whenever people asked Daniel what I did, he simply smiled and said I stayed home with our daughter. At first, those words sounded harmless. Later, they began to sting. I was no longer introduced as a marketing specialist with years of experience. I became just a stay-at-home mom. Daniel never said those exact words, but I could hear them hidden between his sentences. His wardrobe became more expensive every year. His business trips became more frequent. His phone never stopped ringing. Promotions followed one after another, and eventually he became one of the youngest regional directors in his company. Meanwhile, my world became much smaller. School lunches, doctor appointments, laundry, cleaning, homework, birthday parties, every responsibility inside our home quietly became mine. Whenever Daniel returned from another successful business trip, he looked exhausted. I convinced myself that he carried enormous pressure at work. I tried to make his life easier. Dinner was always ready. The house was clean. Lily adored him because I constantly reminded her how hard her father worked. For our family, sometimes I wonder if I accidentally helped create the very man who later became ashamed of me. The changes were so gradual that I barely noticed them. Daniel stopped asking for my opinion about important decisions. He started correcting the way I dressed whenever we attended social events. He suggested I buy more elegant clothes because his colleagues' wives looked more professional. He encouraged me to spend more time at the gym because appearances supposedly mattered in his business circle. At first, I thought he was trying to help. Then I realized he was trying to redesign me. Still, I ignored the uncomfortable feeling growing inside me. After all, marriage required compromise. At least that was what I kept telling myself. One evening, Daniel came home looking unusually excited. His company was organizing its largest annual corporate gala. According to him, the event would include executives, investors, international partners, and the company's CEO. Family members had been invited. I smiled because I thought he finally wanted me to become part of his professional world. For years I had heard stories about his projects, his achievements, and his colleagues, yet I had never met most of the people he worked with every day. I imagined this invitation meant something important. Maybe he was proud of everything we had built together after. The following weeks became unexpectedly stressful. Daniel suddenly became interested in every detail of my appearance. He asked whether I planned to visit a salon. He wondered if my dress looked formal enough. He even offered to pay for a stylist. His attention should have made me feel appreciated, but instead it made me nervous. Every suggestion sounded less like kindness and more like preparation for an important presentation. As if I were another project that needed improvement before being shown to the public. The night before the gala, I stood in front of my closet for nearly an hour. Most of my clothes were practical because my daily life revolved around school runs, grocery shopping, and family activities. I eventually chose a simple navy blue dress that I had worn only once at a friend's wedding. It wasn't luxurious, but it fit well, and I felt comfortable wearing it. When Daniel saw me the next evening, he stared silently for several seconds. I searched his face for approval. Instead, I noticed disappointment. He politely suggested I wear more expensive jewelry. I quietly reached for the small pearl necklace my late mother had given me years earlier. It wasn't valuable in terms of money, but it meant everything to me. Daniel looked at it without saying anything. For some reason, that silence hurt more than criticism would have. The drive to the hotel lasted almost 40 minutes. Rain covered the windshield while soft jazz played through the speakers. Daniel spent most of the trip answering emails on his phone. I looked out the window and tried to calm the strange anxiety building inside my chest. Something felt wrong. I simply couldn't explain why. When we arrived, the hotel looked breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the entrance. Luxury cars filled the driveway. Men in tailored suits greeted one another with confident smiles. Women wearing elegant evening gowns walked across polished marble floors. For a brief moment I wondered whether I truly belonged there. Then I reminded myself that I wasn't there because of wealth or status. I was there because I was Daniel's wife, or at least that was what I still believed. The ballroom looked even more impressive than I had imagined. Soft golden lights reflected from enormous crystal chandeliers, while live music drifted through the room without overpowering the conversations. Waiters moved gracefully between small groups of guests carrying silver trays filled with champagne and elegant appetizers. Everything about the evening seemed carefully designed to impress. I took a slow breath and reminded myself that I belonged there. Daniel rested his hand lightly against my back as we walked inside. At first, I thought the gesture was affectionate. A few moments later, I realized it was simply another way of directing me where he wanted me to stand. Within minutes, people began approaching him. They congratulated him on recent business achievements, laughed at his jokes, and praised his leadership. Watching him interact with everyone was almost fascinating. He looked completely different from the man who quietly ate dinner at home after work. Here he appeared confident, charismatic, and completely in control. Every now and then someone glanced toward me. Most smiled politely. A few asked who I was. Daniel always answered before I had the chance. He never actually introduced me. He simply changed the subject and guided the conversation back toward work. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe the timing just wasn't right. Maybe later, after nearly half an hour, Daniel excused himself to greet another group of executives. He quietly asked me to stay where I was. I watched him disappear into the crowd, shaking hands with people whose names I didn't know, standing alone. I suddenly felt invisible. I picked up a glass of sparkling water and slowly walked toward one of the large windows overlooking the city. The skyline glittered beneath the night sky, reminding me how much the world had changed while I had been busy building a home, a cheerful woman about my age approached me with a warm smile. She introduced herself as one of Daniel's co-workers from another department. Unlike everyone else, she actually seemed interested in getting to know me. She asked how long Daniel and I had known each other. I smiled. I was about to explain that we had been together for more than a decade when another executive joined us. He greeted the woman enthusiastically before turning toward me with obvious curiosity. His first question was simple. He asked whether I worked with Daniel. Before I could answer, Daniel suddenly appeared beside us. Everything that happened next lasted no more than 5 seconds. 5 seconds that completely changed my life. Daniel laughed casually. Then he placed his hand on my shoulder with absolute confidence. He explained that I was Lily's nanny and that I helped take care of the house because his work schedule was far too demanding. For one impossible moment, I honestly believed I had misunderstood him. My mind refused to accept the words I had just heard. I waited for him to smile. To admit it was a joke. To correct himself. Instead, everyone around us nodded politely. Someone even complimented him for finding such dependable help. The conversation continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Meanwhile, I could barely hear anything. The music disappeared. The voices became distant. Even my own heartbeat sounded louder. Then the room around me. 9 years. 9 years of marriage. 9 years of sacrifices. 9 years of believing we were building one life together. Reduced to a stranger hired to care for his child. I somehow managed to keep my face calm. Years of motherhood had taught me how to remain composed during stressful situations. That skill saved me. No one noticed the humiliation burning inside me. No one except one person. The woman who had spoken with me earlier looked directly into my eyes for just a second. I saw confusion on her face, then pity. She knew. She realized something was terribly wrong. I quietly excused myself and walked toward the nearest restroom. The moment the door closed behind me, my legs became weak. I leaned against the marble counter and stared into the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed unfamiliar. Her makeup was still perfect. Her dress looked elegant enough. Nothing appeared broken. Yet I had never felt more shattered. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to walk straight back into that ballroom and expose Daniel in front of everyone. Instead, I washed my hands with cold water and forced myself to breathe slowly. One thought repeated itself over and over. If he could lie about something this personal so effortlessly, what else had he been lying about? That question refused to leave my mind. After several minutes, I returned to the ballroom, not because I wanted to, because I needed answers. Daniel barely acknowledged me. He continued introducing himself to investors, executives, and clients while I quietly observed everything from a distance. For the first time in years, I stopped looking at him as my husband. I started looking at him as if he were a complete stranger. The difference was astonishing. I noticed how often he exaggerated his accomplishments, how carefully he changed small details in every conversation, how easily he became whoever each person expected him to be. Confidence, charm, success, everything looked polished. Almost rehearsed. Hours passed. The humiliation slowly transformed into something colder. Curiosity. Near the end of the evening, I stepped outside onto a quiet terrace to escape the noise. The fresh air felt wonderful. I stood alone for several minutes until I heard voices coming from the other side of a decorative wall. At first, I wasn't trying to listen. I simply recognized Daniel's voice. Then I heard another man speaking. The conversation immediately caught my attention. The other man sounded nervous. He warned Daniel that someone had started asking questions about irregular financial reports connected to one of their largest projects. Daniel answered with complete confidence. He wasn't worried. According to him, everything had been arranged months earlier. No one would ever connect the missing money to him. The documents had already been signed. Responsibility officially belonged to someone else. The other man still sounded uncertain. Daniel laughed. He said that people only looked at the person standing in front of them. As long as everyone believed his image, nobody would ever question the truth. I felt every hair on my arms stand up. I wasn't listening to office gossip. I was listening to my husband calmly discussing what sounded like fraud. Suddenly, the way he had introduced me made perfect sense. It wasn't only embarrassment. Daniel had spent years creating an image, the successful executive, the perfect businessman, the flawless public figure. And somewhere along the way, his real wife had become inconvenient. I remained on that terrace for several minutes after the voices disappeared. The cool night air should have calmed me, but instead it sharpened my thoughts. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I wasn't even thinking about the humiliation of being introduced as a nanny. That pain was still there, but something much larger had taken its place for the first time in years. I saw Daniel without the excuses I had always made for him. I had spent nearly a decade explaining away every cold comment, every broken promise, every moment when I felt invisible. I convinced myself that success came with stress, that ambitious people changed, that marriage required endless compromise, standing alone outside that ballroom. I finally admitted something I should have admitted years earlier. Respect cannot survive where honesty no longer exists. The drive home was almost silent. Daniel talked about how successful the evening had been and how impressed the executives were with his presentation. I barely listened. He never asked what I thought. He never noticed that something inside me had completely changed. The following morning, I woke up before sunrise. I looked around the kitchen where I had prepared thousands of breakfasts over the years. Nothing looked different, yet everything felt different. Instead of making another list of groceries or school activities, I opened my laptop. It had been years since I updated my EQ. Reading through my old achievements almost felt like reading about another woman. Marketing campaigns, international clients. Awards. Leadership projects. Somehow, I had forgotten that I used to be ambitious too. That same week, while Lily was at school, I enrolled in online certification courses to refresh my professional skills. Every afternoon, I studied for hours. I told Daniel I wanted to keep my mind active. He barely looked up from his phone. He simply nodded. For the first time in years, his lack of interest worked in my favor. Weeks turned into months. Every morning I followed the same routine. Take Lily to school. Study. Apply for jobs. Build professional connections again. The confidence I thought I had lost slowly returned. One afternoon, an old colleague recognized my name on a professional networking site. She invited me to coffee. By the end of that meeting, she recommended me for a senior marketing position at her company. I hadn't even finished all my certifications, yet someone still believed in my abilities. That realization nearly made me cry. 2 months later, I accepted the position. The salary was better than I expected. The work challenged me most. Importantly, people valued my ideas again. Meanwhile, Daniel barely noticed the transformation happening in front of him. He assumed my new job was simply a hobby. He still believed I would organize every school meeting, every doctor's appointment, every household responsibility. The difference was that I quietly stopped saying yes to everything. For the first time in years, I started protecting my own time. He didn't like that. His frustration grew with every passing week, yet he still never asked how I felt. One evening, I remembered the conversation I had overheard at the corporate gala. The details refused to leave my mind. I wasn't trying to investigate Daniel, but I also couldn't ignore what I had heard. A few weeks later, news articles began appearing online about an internal investigation inside his company, financial irregularities, questionable contracts. Missing funds. My heart raced. As I read every update, the investigation expanded. Rapidly, several senior employees were questioned. Daniel insisted everything was under control. He looked confident. Almost too confident. Then one Saturday morning, everything changed. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. He locked himself inside his home office for hours. When he finally walked downstairs, the confidence I had seen at the gala was gone. His face looked pale. His hands trembled. The company had suspended several executives while investigators reviewed financial records. Daniel tried convincing me that innocent people were often caught in situations like this months earlier. I would have believed him. Now I simply listened. Within another few weeks, the story became national news. The investigation uncovered manipulated reports, hidden payments, and falsified approvals connected to several executives. Daniel's name appeared among them, watching. The news felt strangely unreal. The man everyone admired. The man who cared more about appearances than truth. The man who pretended his own wife was a nanny. His carefully constructed image collapsed almost overnight. Friends disappeared. Business partners stopped calling. People who once praised him suddenly claimed they had always been suspicious. Success had surrounded him with many faces. Failure revealed how few of them were real. One evening he finally asked whether I believed he was innocent. I looked at him for a long moment. For years I had searched for the right words. Now I didn't need any. I simply realized I no longer trusted the person standing in front of me. Without trust, there was nothing left to save. A few days later, I met with an attorney. The divorce process began quietly. There were no dramatic arguments. No shouting. No public accusations. I refused to build my future on anger. Instead, I focused on protecting Lily and creating a stable life for both of us. The legal process took several months. When everything was finalized, I moved into a modest but beautiful house closer to my new office. It wasn't large. It wasn't luxurious, but every room felt peaceful. Lily adjusted far better than I expected. Children often understand honesty better than adults do. She didn't need expensive things. She needed consistency. Love. Safety. One afternoon, almost a year after that corporate gala, I attended a business conference representing my new company. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had believed my professional life was over. Now I was giving presentations to clients again. After my session ended, several people approached to congratulate me. Among them was an older executive who had attended Daniel's gala months before. At first, I wasn't sure whether he remembered me. Then he smiled warmly. He apologized for something I never expected. He admitted that he had later discovered who I really was. He said he had always felt uncomfortable about the introduction that evening but hadn't wanted to embarrass anyone publicly. His apology surprised me, not because I needed it, because it reminded me that decent people notice far more than we think. As I walked back toward my hotel that evening, I remembered the woman staring back at me in the restroom mirror a year earlier. She believed she had lost everything. She was wrong. What she actually lost was an illusion. She lost the belief that another person's opinion determined her value. She lost the habit of making herself smaller so someone else could appear bigger. She lost the fear of starting over. And once those things disappeared. Everything else became possible. If someone asks me today what the worst day of my life was, I still think about that corporate gala, but I no longer remember it as the night my husband introduced me as his nanny. I remember it as the night I stopped being invisible. Sometimes the greatest gift life gives us arrives disguised as humiliation. Because humiliation forces You asked to see the truth, and the truth, no matter how painful, is always the beginning of freedom.